This is the reference I want to draw, the neoclassical structure of the Mazarin Library in Paris. In the video I made yesterday, I presented 4 ways of thinking, 4 ways of focus before we put pen on paper, and that many drawings fail, and many people drawing fail to improve because these 4 ways of thinking before we start to draw are neglected. So first, I'll quickly summarize the 4 points, and then you can watch me put them into practice as I draw this and continue to make points about the drawing process of this particular scene. The first really important point is observation. We need to observe carefully what we're drawing. The sorts of things I'm looking for are, I look at this dome and see that I'm looking up from underneath, and therefore it's relatively shallow. I'm looking to see what degree of curvature we have here, and I know from my understanding of perspectives that as we go higher, the curves increase in curvature. They become rounder. Now I'm looking at this colonnade and I'm working out firstly, is there an even or odd number of columns? Are they symmetrical? And they're rather obviously not symmetrical. We have a larger doorway area between the 2 center ones, but the 2 outer columns are also not equally spaced with the center one. And then we have a step back and we have a pilaster on each side. And then the building steps out again. And visually, we get a drop at each of these levels. So I'm noticing that, so I don't want to draw a straight line all the way across because I need to step down. And then further back, we have symmetrical wings. We have a pediment on top. I'm noting the overhang of the pediment. If I don't get that right, I'll make the pediment smaller than it really is. I'm noticing what happens here in the front, that we have these steps, but they step down at an angle. The second point to consider is, what do I want to bring out? What do I want the overall effect of my drawing to be? And for this, with this drawing, I think I want the simple grandeur of the architecture to come out. For that reason, I'm not going to include any figures. There is a cropped figure here who I could have slid further along if I'd wanted the figure for scale. So therefore I want to work on getting the proportions correct. And I want to work on having nice parallel architectural elements that are parallel or at right angle to each other where they're at right angle to each other. I want my drawing to have a nice stately presence to it. The third point was to start to consider what lines and marks and techniques I'm going to use in my drawing. So looking at this, I'm wanting this central entrance area to be a little more in the focus than the 2 side wings that are further away and which also continue off the page. So I'm thinking I'm going to draw this central section with a 0.2mm pen, but switch to a 0.1mm pen to create a lighter visual effect with these wings and help them to sit back. I'm thinking about how I'm going to do some of the technical elements here. I've decided that for this inscription, I'm not going to try and actually write the letters. I think the scale is too small for me to do that successfully. So I want to draw lines that will create the effect of this inscription without actually having to try and write the letters. Similarly, with these sculptured reliefs, I want to create the effect of what we're seeing, not get bogged down in the detail. And the same thing with these figures that flank the clock. And my intention is just to do a minute or 2 of just playing with lines and marks before I start my drawing, just to make sure I've got my head in a helpful spot for what I'm trying to do. And the final area, the 4th area of thinking, is to just consider the strategy of where am I going to start and how am I going to continue to give myself the best chance of using my observation and creating what I want to bring out from what I observe, and use the technical devices I have in my drawing toolbox, so to speak. And I think what I'm going to do with this, and I am drawing freehand in pen, so there's no erasing of any lines. Every mark I put on the paper will be there at the end. So how will I start this? I think I'm going to start with this column here because that's a fairly easy object to draw to scale. If I draw it the same size as this, then my finished drawing should be approximately the same size. If I draw my column larger, then my finished drawing will be larger and vice versa. I'll draw this column. That will give me this horizontal line above and below. And then I'm going to draw this doorway in because that lets me jump across and position the other central column. And then it'll be easy enough, I think, to put these two columns in the right place. And then I'll move out with these first sides that drop down a bit. And then I'll either do the pediment then, or I might do the two wings of the entranceway. And then I'll do the drum, and then I'll put the dome on top, and then I'll do these two wings last, and I can align them easily. And also, having drawn all of this, which I want to be more prominent, once I can see what marks I've made here, I can get a better sense of how light to make the marks for these two wings. And I also want these to look identical, so I want to draw them both at the same time. So let's start to put it into practice and see if it pans out in drawing the way I'm planning it to. So I start with this center left column. Put the Corinthian capital on top, get a sense of the horizontal top of this colonnade, the base of the entablature that sits on top, and do a not so successful line at the bottom to define the base of the columns, not the base of the columns, but the base of the bases that the columns sit on. And so now I've got the width worked out, jumping across that gap via the spaces I need for the door, as I said, and now positioning these side columns, trying to keep the relative spaces between the columns correct. And then it's just a case of filling in the rest of these details to get the left side of the colonnade done, and then straight away going over to the other side. Whenever I have symmetrical elements in a building, in a structure, in a decorative element, I always do each side of the symmetry one after the other, while I still have the memory of it in my muscles, in my fingers, in my mind. That's particularly important, I think, if we have a curved pattern involved that's symmetrical. And I've paid attention to the overhang of this central section because that's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, the width of the pediment. And if I don't take it out to the full width, it just will end up being quite a bit smaller. Now I have these drop downs, if you like, as I think of them, on the sides, the first stepping back from the very outer part of the colonnade. So I get those in position, and now the two end parts of what is basically the space under the dome inside the entranceway. And again, this is quite straightforward. These two pilasters that are grouped together at the very end. And again, positioning the step down. What I do is I look to see what part of the entablature on the lower part, what it aligns with on the higher part, and if possible, and if I've been accurate enough, I try and join up to that same location. Now the same thing on the right hand side. Doing my best to keep everything in balance and even. So it's important to put this horizontal band, paying particular attention that I do put it in the gaps between the columns and I don't actually put it across a column. I've certainly done that before. It's just one of those moments I've learned to always hesitate for a second look before I put the pen on the paper. And now we have the pediment coming into place. It's very easy to make pediments too high, too pointy. That's a problem I often see in drawings. And of course, if we have sculptures filling the pediments, then we have to change the shape or the size or the positions of the sculptures often as well to fit the shape. So it's one problem that can lead to other problems. Now in this space, we have a clock with two reclining figures flanking it. And again, I've just suggested the detail. I haven't tried to draw figures. And here we have what I mentioned earlier now by making some letter-like looking marks, which end up looking more like letters or more realistic letters from this distance than actually trying to draw letters. And there's a bit of side overhang that we can see on each side. And now this was probably the trickiest part, was working out the drum and where it sits. I feel like my drum is slightly too wide, that it's a bit too large. I'm not sure why, because I align it with what is underneath it in the reference. And I don't feel that my portico is out of proportion, but I feel something's not quite working right there. My building has become slightly larger despite my intentions, so maybe that's also partly it. So I position this central window first, and then the two side windows will sit on each side. I realise now that I've left out a little decorative element on the wall above each of the arched windows. I can only hope that that doesn't devastate the overall impact of the drawing. These decorative elements can be really helpful because they can help us draw attention away from lines that aren't quite right. So now I have the cornice of the drum, just trying to suggest the architectural elements there by the shadows. And then I need to work out where the actual dome is going to go, how high. I sort of do some marks. I work out where the drum comes on each side. Now you'll notice that the drum doesn't come to the very edge, to the very rim of the drum. The dome sits back a little bit. And again, this is where careful observation is really important, because it makes the dome significantly larger if we take it out to the corners, to the very edges of the drum. Probably also means we flatten out the curve to stretch it right to the edge. And a very light touch for that cross on top. So now I'm doing the entranceway and the decorative elements, the shallow reliefs. So again, working hard to create the effect of the decoration. I'm not trying to work out what is the decoration. Is that a face? Is that an angel? Is that a shield? I'm looking at the effect, that basically the overall shapes that I see without working out what they are, and the shadows around them, and where there's lots of little fussy bits and where there isn't. And I'm trying to replicate that with marks. And now just put in some hatching, some vertical hatching for the door, just to represent the local colour. And now some more hatching to represent the shade behind the columns, because I feel that this is an important part of making the front of the portico, the front of the colonnade stand out and define the columns a little more emphatically. And then we just have these side windows. And it may be that the drum doesn't look quite as wide when I put the wings on as well, because what we see does depend on what's around it for our sense of it. And now I've switched to my 0.1 and I'm trying to be fairly light and suggestive with this. I still want to include some of the detail, but I don't want to draw as much. I want to keep the feel much lighter, more feathery lines, the hatching less close together, creating less darkness. All little techniques to help these two side wings to sit back, to give us a sense of their presence and of the overall structure of the building, but not to compete visually with this entranceway. Behind me, taking this photo, is the Seine River. So this is in a magnificent location. And I think it looks across to the Musée du Louvre as well. But if that's wrong, I'm sure somebody will tell me in the comments. And so now, again, this symmetrical section, I go across and I do it straight away, while the method, the process of drawing the detail on the left is all still fresh in my mind, and I can use the same way of drawing, the same order of marks to create the same effect. The order in which we draw things actually impacts the way it looks. And so if I draw this in a different rhythm, a different direction of lines in a different order, it will actually look different to if I do it as close as possible. So just again suggesting the details for this side section. And I think that's about it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. Look, I think one of the biggest untalked about issues with drawing is the lack of thought process, the lack of thinking out what we're going to do, of careful observation, of strategizing before we put pen on paper. And if we do this first, when we put pen on paper, we are so far ahead of where we would have otherwise been. Look, if you want to have a go of drawing this beautiful Parisian structure, then you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page. So why not get it and have a go? But look, whatever you draw and whatever way you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.